Well, many of you may be familiar with Calvin and Hobbes' comic strip. On one Mother's Day, Calvin is pictured standing by his mother's bed. "Hey, Mom, wake up. I made you a Mother's Day card." "My, how sweet of you," she says. "I did it all by myself." She says, "Go ahead and read it." She begins to read, or she's going to read the card. She begins to read, "I was going to buy a card with hearts of pink and red, but then I thought I'd rather spend the money on me instead. It's awfully hard to buy things when one's allowance is so small, so I guess you're pretty lucky I got you anything at all. Happy Mother's Day. There, I've said it. Now I'm done. So how about getting out of bed and fixing breakfast for your son? Signed, Calvin." Well, it did rhyme, but I don't think he quite had the gist of Mother's Day and of the love he needed to have for his mother. The story's told that 3 sons grew up. They left home, they went out on their own, and prospered. Getting back together, they discussed the gifts they were able to give their elderly mother. The first said, "Well, I built a big house for our mother." The second said, "Well, I sent her a Mercedes with a driver." The third smiled and said, "I've got you both beat. You remember how Mom enjoyed reading the Bible, and you know she can't see well anymore? I sent her a remarkable parrot that recites the entire Bible. It took 12 years to teach him. He's one of a kind. Mama just has to name the chapter and verse, and the parrot recites it." Well, soon thereafter, Mom sent out her letters of thanks. "Milton," she wrote, "the house you built is so huge. I live in only one room, but I have to clean the whole house. Gerald," she wrote to the other son, "I am too old to travel. I stay most of the time at home, so I rarely use the Mercedes, and the driver is so rude." "Dearest Donald," she wrote to her third son, "you have the good sense to know what your mother likes. The chicken was delicious." Oh, that's just terrible. Well, we have different thoughts about mother, relationship of mother with the children. There is also the aspect of the husband and wife and their relationship together. And these are addressed as we come to the end of the book of Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 31, verses 10 through 31, if you want to read along with me. Proverbs 31, 10 through 31. "A wife of noble character who can find? She is worth far more than rubies. Her husband has full confidence in her and lacks nothing of value. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. She selects wool and flax and works with eager hands. She is like the merchant ships, bringing her food from afar. She gets up while it is still dark. She provides food for her family and portions for her servant girls. She considers a field and buys it. Out of her earnings, she plants a vineyard. She sets about her work vigorously. Her arms are strong for her task. She sees that her trading is profitable, and her lamp does not go out at night. In her hand she holds the distaff, and grasps the spindle with her fingers. She opens her arms to the poor and extends her hand to the needy. When it snows, she has no fear for her household, for all of them are clothed in scarlet. She makes coverings for her bed. She is clothed in fine linen and purple. Her husband is respected at the city gate, where he takes his seat among the elders of the land. She makes the linen garments and sells them, and supplies the merchants with sashes. She is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come. She speaks with wisdom, and faithful instruction is on her tongue. She watches over the affairs of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children arise and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. Many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who hears the Lord is to be praised. A woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her the reward she has earned, and let her works bring her praise at the city gate. The book of Proverbs closes with what is basically a poem or a hymn, and it is in praise of the noble woman or the noble wife. Now, some have looked at this and been a bit sarcastic in their attitude. Liz Higgs said, the ideal woman was described 2,500 years ago in Proverbs 31, and she is still intimidating her sisters ever since. Well, that's not the right attitude to have. Proverbs is about wisdom, what is true wisdom. And as it closes, it talks about this noble woman or wife, and she is a fitting example for all women to follow. As I said, it's a poem. Very fitting ending to Proverbs. And we have here an acrostic, not obvious in English, of course, but it is in Hebrew. Each verse of the poem of praise begins with the succeeding letter of the Hebrew alphabet. The 20 verses of the poem correspond to the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And we might say that the acrostic conveys a message of completeness. It describes what wisdom looks like from A to Z. The woman wisdom is described in Proverbs chapter 1 through 9. Here at chapter 31, verses 10 through 31, we have a complement of that description. It describes the results of a life lived in the pursuit of wisdom. We see what mature wisdom looks like. Dave Bland observed, the home that wisdom builds displays love and service for others. We read in this text about the wife of noble character. Literally, that is a woman of strength, a woman of worth, the valiant wife. Now, the writer says that a wife of noble character is hard to find. When you find this good wife, you have found a treasure. He also says it's hard to find a faithful man. Proverbs 20, verse 6, many a man claims to have unfailing love, but a faithful man who can find. In our text, it says that the wife is worth much to her husband. We note that the husband is only briefly mentioned in these verses. Verses 11 through 12, her husband has full confidence in her and lacks nothing of value. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. And really, that statement's more about her than it is him. And then at the close of the poem, verses 28 and 29, her children arise and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. Beginning with verse 12, the description of the woman's work focuses primarily on her economic activity. The noble woman shows initiative and industry. Well, I know a couple of women, a couple of wives who have been very industrious. One of them is my wife. You know, we're having that anniversary on Tuesday. Isn't this a nice text to fit in together? But back in 1994, when we moved to Rosebud, all three children were now in school. She'd been a stay-at-home mom, but we needed health insurance. And so she found a job that had good health insurance. And you get a job and you just end up working for years. And part of it was to provide health insurance, but also a good income. There were sacrifices to be made in not being able to stay at home and be just a homemaker. And she served well in that capacity. And then I have this oldest daughter who happens to be visiting this evening. And she has spent much of her marriage as a military wife. Her husband was away several times, especially while Dietrich and Madeline were very little. Dietrich is famous for saying, on one occasion, when he saw his dad, well, Dad isn't in a Turkey anymore. He'd been deployed to Turkey, but he was back for a while. Angie has shown great initiative in industry, in caring for her family, in making extra money for the family. And I can say the same thing about many of you, of your industry. It's very valuable to find the noble woman, the noble wife. What are some of the activities of the noble wife? They're described in our text. In verses 10, I've got this right. Anyway, in the Hebrew text, we have the verse 20. It uses the word hand 4 times. The NIV adds variety by using different words for the hand. The English Standard Version translates it this way: she puts her hands to the distaff, and her hands hold the spindle. She opens her hand to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. She works hard. Her hands are busy doing good things. The wife, the mother, has great influence with her family. Stories told about a drill sergeant who was frustrated in his efforts to make a soldier out of a certain recruit. The trainee lagged behind on marches, used any excuse to go on sick call, grumbled constantly about the food, and never made his cot properly. But one day, a noticeable change took place in the young man's attitude. When asked to what he attributed the soldier's change in attitude, the drill sergeant commented, "Threats and punishment didn't work, so I had to resort to the ultimate weapon. I called his mother." A grandmother was telling her granddaughter good night when the little girl said, "Mommy and Daddy are entertaining some very important people downstairs." Well, Grandma agreed, "You're right, but how did you know?" "Well, just listen," the little granddaughter said. "Mommy is laughing at all of Daddy's jokes." Showing great support for her husband. She'd probably heard those corny jokes before. Well, the activities of the noble wife are described. She is basically good in business dealings. Kind of an interesting description of a woman in that time period. She provides for her family in every way. When the cold weather comes, her children don't have to freeze. They're well clothed. She is a pride and joy of her husband. As he sits at the gates, he is honored because of her. And so we have some words of praise of the noble wife. When we come to the end, the poem ends on a note of praise, verses 28 through 31, as we read. Her children and her husband praise her. The whole community joins in honoring her as well. And a final perspective is offered in verse 30. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Men look for certain qualities in a wife. Sometimes they don't look for the best qualities. If these words were written, as we believe, by Solomon, he had lots of marriages. They weren't good marriages for the most part. Seems like he may have learned something from his own bad experiences. Charm can deceive. And the one that is beautiful is going to grow older. She's going to change, just as the husband will. But what really matters is a woman who fears the Lord. One who takes God seriously in her life. What really endures is the woman who fears the Lord. And you know, here at the end of the book of Proverbs, we have this statement about fearing the Lord. Back at the beginning of Proverbs chapter 1, verse 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. We could say that Proverbs begins and ends with wisdom, and the noble wife is a great demonstration of that wisdom. An epitaph on his wife's tombstone, written by her husband after 60 years of marriage, read, "She always made home happy." There are a number of quotes by well-known individuals about one of the women in their life, their mother. George Washington said, "My mother was the most beautiful woman I ever saw. All I am, I owe to my mother. I attribute all my success in life to her moral, intellectual, and physical education I received from her." Abraham Lincoln is famous for saying, "All that I am or ever hope to be, I owe to my angel mother." There was never a woman like her. She was gentle as a dove and brave as a lioness. The memory of my mother and her teachings were, after all, the only capital I had to start life with, and on that capital I've made my way. Andrew Jackson said that. And then Booker T. Washington said, "In all my efforts to learn to read, my mother shared fully my ambition and sympathized with me and aided me in every way she could. If I've done anything in life worth attention, I feel sure that I inherited the disposition from my mother." Dave Bland concludes his comments on our text with these words. The hymn in verses 10 through 31, praising the wife of noble character, ultimately serves as a praise of wisdom itself. Those who construct their lives by the principles of wisdom manifest the kind of home built by the wife of noble character. The poem pictures the culmination of a life lived by wisdom.